All right, that being said, I have hit record,
Okay.
but we are not in. Whoa. We are not over here in the thing there.
Oh,
So,
there we go.
click and click. Can everyone hear me?
Wait.
We've got an echo.
That's because you're welcome.
Someone forgot to turn their mic
So
or their
someone-
speakers.
Yeah. Sorry. Can y'all hear me?
Can you hear Liz? Can you hear me?
That is awesome.
Can you hear either of us? But it's good if you can hear Liz too. Like,
Yes.
very good.
The chat is silent.
The chat is silent. They've all gone. They're off running around doing things.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Brian. Okay. Sweet.
Cool.
Okay. Before we get started, just gonna remind everyone.
To clap.
Sure.
No.
There's a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom call. Please click that and open it and type your questions in there if you have questions. If you type it in the regular chat box, chances are it's going to get lost in the chatter. So
True. And we've been trying to telepathic mode, but it's not quite working
Yeah.
yet. So
Yeah.
it is what it is. There you have it. That way you guys can chat to your heart's content about nonsense, about whatever you want. But then we also know where to look for the actual questions.
Yes.
And Liz will chat with you.
I sure will. Silent, quietly.
That's right. That is right.
Yeah.
All right. So I hope all of you are having fun at your Roll to Move weekend and you've been able to get in on some games and stuff. If you were able to see my web blending video little class yesterday, great. If not, I have uploaded it to the Frogs Dropbox and they will be uploading it to YouTube when they can. So it will be up there eventually. So that's nice. Alrighty. So what are we talking about today? Liz, do you remember? Magic. That is, no, not what we're talking about.
Just kidding. No, we're talking about creatures.
Creatures! Namely little lizards and stuff like that. No, I'm just kidding. Brimstone has a lot of big creatures, kind of like, am I pointing in the right direction? Yes, opposite way. Like the magma giant here, but also you've got your harbingers, you've got your Belials, guardians, all kinds of cool stuff. Ancient ones, Goliath, all kinds of fun stuff. And they all have different ways to make them look cooler than they are. So this class is basically on enhancing your models. Maybe we'll do a little texture. Scott gave me a list of like 45 things to cover. And I was like, you do know this is a 2-hour class, right? It does take time to do these things. So we will cover as much as we possibly can. If you guys have questions or you'd like to see something in particular, and I can actually pull that off with the models I have here, I would love to do it. But we got to start somewhere. So we're going to start with the old wet palette. I know, there was a gasp in the audience. So here's my palette cam. Okay, so this is my wet palette. This is a Red Grass Games wet palette. Very nice. I choose to use just regular parchment paper. Reynolds parchment paper works great. It's baking paper. I really like it. It doesn't really let any water through. It doesn't let any paint down into the sponge either, and I like that. I like adding water as I see fit, but it does still give you that bubble of, I don't know, your paint doesn't dry without adding more water to it. So I don't know how that happens, but it just does. It's science or something, and I flunked out of science, so I wouldn't even know how that works.
Right.
Anyways, when I use my wet palette, a couple things. I only use it for today while I'm using it, and then I let it dry out at night. That's how I combat mold. And mold is disgusting. And even though Red Grass Games is supposedly doesn't mold, Liz successfully molded her sponge.
She did.
Yeah, and it was pretty gross. So I'm a brush licker. I don't want to have, and I'm always adding a little bit of water from the side of my palette into my paint. I just don't want, the mold is just no bueno. It is not good. So that's how I keep it from molding. I just let it dry out every night. Now you might say, hey, but I mixed this special color and how will I have it for tomorrow? Well, just learn to mix your colors. That's the best bet. The better you get at mixing colors, the more you don't need to save your paint for 14 days. Also, you may have noticed this when you save your paint for days or weeks at a time, it does start getting to be this weird consistency that's not really beneficial for painting. So, that being said, let your palette dry out every night. You'll be happy. Your tongue will be happy that it doesn't have mold on it, all that good stuff. So the other thing is I've noticed, and this is just from working, I'll work a 8-hour to 14-hour day painting, maybe 16 hours some days. And I noticed that at times the paint on my palette actually starts drying out quicker. And I always wonder what the heck is going on. Well, what I started noticing was the water level to my sponge was going way down as well. So what I try to do is I try to keep my water right at the top of the sponge, not higher than the top of the sponge, because then my paper will start moving around. It just starts floating around on the top of the water. But I keep my water as high as I possibly can on that sponge, and that keeps me well hydrated over my paint. So that's the wet palette. Great way to use it. Try it out. If you haven't used a wet palette, it's definitely worth a shot. A little bit weird at first to get used to, but once you got it, it's the one thing that I don't leave home without. If I do, I just don't paint because it's not worth fighting the paint drying all the time. Okay, so that's your palette. Any questions on that?
Not on the palette, but we do have a question about paint.
We will not be using paint today, so I refuse.
Right.
We are gonna. Okay,
right.
Never mind. What about paint?
People next door are crazy. Michael says, I have a random question. Do you ever make use of craft paints? The cheapo, like $2 plastic bottles of paint at Michael's?
Yeah, all the time. In fact, that's what I started with, pretty much. It is definitely a little cheaper. You get a bigger bottle for the same amount, and a lot of times Michael's has that 50% off, so they're like 50 cents for a huge bottle of paint. Now, they don't always work as well as our miniatures paints, though. They're not milled as fine. They're made for like painting, a big jar or something, not necessarily a miniature. So sometimes they don't work all that great. But I know guys that have won Golden Demon trophies with craft paint. So it's just all a matter of making it work for you. That being said, I don't use a whole lot of craft paints now. I just use miniature paints. They tend to stick a little bit better, but I will tell you this. I used to use Apple Barrel and Delta Ceramic Coats. Those were the two main ones at Michael's. And when I would airbrush those paints, they would not come off. You couldn't rub them off, you couldn't scratch them, nothing. For some reason, when they were airbrushed onto a miniature, they stuck so stinking good. And I don't know why that is to this day. It's just a weird thing. So, I don't think there's anything wrong with using craft paints. Just sort of test them out. If the pigments are too big or whatever, you'll kind of know because it'll be just clumpy paint. You might have to thin it a little bit more. But you can't really thin a pigment size, so it is what it is. Also, our acrylic paints for the hobby do have some things that help them stick a little bit better to miniatures. And those craft paints are made to be painted on paper and, other things that kind of absorb the paint a little bit, so they stick better. So you won't have that stuff, but that being said, I use inks and stuff. They weren't meant for miniatures. So you can definitely use craft paints. And if you already have a huge collection of them, or you can steal them from someone in your family, great. Works out. They do have sometimes way better colors too. just saying. All right. So brushes. Let's talk about brushes really quick. If you were in my class yesterday, if you missed it, don't worry. It will be up on YouTube. If you're in my class yesterday, we forwent. What's the word for that? I said don't worry about using Klinsky sables because they don't wet blend as good as regular hobby brushes, the synthetic ones. These ones are way better for base coating and stuff. However, when you switch to more detail work and everything, that's when these brushes start working their way big time back in my painting. So you can definitely use hobby brushes if that's all you got is synthetics. Just find ones with good tips on them, but you will not find a good of a tip as with the Klinsky sable. This one's probably the best brush for me. Is my favorite brush out there. It's a Raphael 8404, and they are really good. They have a big body with a fine tip. You can do really fine freehand or wrinkles and stuff, which we're going to be exploring some wrinkles here today. I've also got this Rubelov brush, which is really hard to get because it's from Russia, and right now it's just a little bit hard to get these brushes. So at some point we will be able to get them again, but the Rubelov brushes are really good. They're actually made for people who paint little pictures on fingernails, and they're rock stars. I absolutely love them. Luckily I have a whole bunch in my house. So that being said, those brushes, wet palettes, let's get on to doing some details on miniatures. So one of the things that you can do, and I get this question a lot, like on models with big wings and stuff. So like this Harbinger, for instance, this is our gaming model. I wanted to paint him obviously different than the box art I did many years ago, so I went with this color scheme, and I kind of dig it. It's kind of cool. Anyways, what I did for the wings, and I think this is actually the old sculpt. The newer sculpt actually has a lot more detail sculpted into the wings, but this one was the old sculpt, and it was a little bit soft. So what I did was I just added some streaks in, some lines. And I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time over detailing these wings, but I did want to give them some detail, more than they actually had. So that being said, I just put little streaks. So one of the tricks to doing these little streaks, so they don't just look like you put a bunch of streaks on a model, is, let's see here, get this white piece of paper out. I almost couldn't see it there on my,
Oh yeah.
it's like the same color as my puddle pad. By the way, that puddle pad's not for paint. It's in case I have to go to the bathroom mid-class. No? All right.
No.
It is for paint. I don't do that.
That'd be weird.
At least not during class.
Oh my god.
Anyways. Everyone just left.
Right.
Okay. So here's the deal. When you're grabbing... So one thing, when you're doing fine lines like this on a model, if you thin your paint a whole bunch, you're going to have to put several strokes of that fine line on just to build the color up. It's very difficult. So I found on stuff like this where you need it to be like a really fine line and just quick, and you don't want to hit it 2 or 3 times to build up color, don't thin your paint as much. So little things like this. Also, you'll find when you do fine lines, the more you thin your paint, the more you have less control, or the less control you have of your paint being in a thin little area. It will kind of like just sploosh out like that. So that being said, I'm gonna grab some of this black, and what I do is I flatten my brush, and let's get in close. Okay, so this is my size 1 or 2? Size 1 Raphael. Like this, it's a big fat brush. If I put it like normal, it's about that shape, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some of my palette. I'm going to smush my paintbrush down so it's flat, like a chisel. And now, you see it's kind of splayed out like that, but look at when I turn it sideways. It's super, super thin. That's as thin as you can paint a line without putting other lines and making it even thinner. But that's a pretty darn thin line. So that's what we're looking for. So I'm going to grab a little bit more of this. Now, the thing is, when you're putting those lines on a model, let's get this in focus right there on the paper. This is going to be one of those weird classes where I have the focus up higher and lower like constantly. So when you're putting lines like that, so if I'm doing that Harbinger and, excuse me, I just want to put a big old line, and I'm going to have to put a little bit of water in that paint so it works on paper.
You talked for a while, so.
Well, it's also on paper, so it's soaking in. But if I put this line on like this, that looks okay, but the line kind of abruptly stops there, and it abruptly starts there. So what I want to do, also it's kind of the same thickness all the way through. So if I grab this like this, I've actually never done this on paper. It's so much easier on a model, but this is easier to show. So if I start with my brush turned into a wedge, and I'm really light with it, see that I get that really fine line right there. And as I go, if I push harder, watch, the brush actually splays out and it's a thicker line. And then if I keep pulling it and pull up on my brush, I can actually get, and sometimes I have to fan out the end, I get a really thin line at the end, a really thin line at the beginning, a really thin line at the end, and a thicker line in the middle. And so that's what I'm trying to do in a very quick way on the Harbinger. So that's basically getting these, like, so it doesn't just look like a straight line and it just stops. It looks like it's actually part of the model. Now, if I had that little hiccup right there, like I have, you can always go back in and then hit it again right in that spot. Pull this out. Something like that. What if part of this line split off? So you can start having all kinds of cool little shapes here where your line is not the same thickness at the different ends. I can also start a line that's thick at the start. So maybe I want it to be really thick at the start. And then it maybe even gets thicker in the middle. And then it gets thinner at the end. So I'm pulling off on my pressure and pulling out like that. So if I want that to be super, super thin line at the end, I can flatten out my brush again with the little chisel action and make it a super fine line. So that gives you a lot better look than if it's just a straight line. So if you notice on these, now they're up super close. If you notice on all these lines, they're thinner to thicker to thinner. And sometimes I did it in different orders. You know, sometimes it went thin to thick to thin to thick again. Like it's kind of back and forth, but it just kind of makes it so it's not quite so mundane and it looks a little bit more like a texture. Yeah. So any questions on that? Because we're going to jump right into actually putting texture on something with wrinkly skin. I know. Super excited. As I get older, I'm starting to live my miniatures. Okay, no questions. It's pretty self-explanatory, but I think this gives you a really good idea of how... Oh.
Brian said, are you trying to avoid the texture or enhance it?
Enhance texture. So I'm trying to avoid it looking just like a brush stroke. Like I don't want it to be just a straight line type of thing. It's got thickness in areas. It goes to a point, and also that allows me to when I'm doing a model like this, it allows me to do a highlight right in the middle of the wing, and it doesn't look weird. It's not just a line in the middle of the wing with no other context to it. So making sure that you taper the ends is a smart thing to do.
Right.
Question?
Yes. Michael said, did you wet blend the color on those wings?
No, I airbrushed that. I'm not completely crazy. So I started, and so that's where like I saved a ton of time on this because, okay, so all these areas where I got bigger highlights and then all the highlights on the arms and in the face and all that stuff, those were all done with layering and also wet blending over an airbrush base coat. So that made those areas a lot more interesting and like pop more. But the wings, I literally did nothing to. I worked on the bone parts of the wings. I gave them little highlights and stuff. But I also, this is our gaming piece, and I don't have a whole lot of time to paint for myself. So I literally painted this in a couple hours on a Sunday afternoon. Maybe a couple more than a couple hours, but 3 or 4 hours, and I had what I have here. And so I needed to go really quick. So on the wings themselves, like if I was doing this for more of a studio version, I would have probably put a lot more work into the wings and blended these out a little bit more. But for something like this where I just want to go fast, this saved me a ton of time on those wings. And you notice I did it on the inside too. So I can always come back. I've actually thought of this and like airbrushed in a little bit of this. I think this was Reaper's Phantom Glow right here. It's like a really, really nice tealy blue. Really bright. I use it a lot for like ethereal type looking things, but maybe just airbrushing a little bit of a haze right here so it brightens that area up. But I don't need to do that. Like you can't see it when you're playing it on the gaming table. Like you basically just see this. So yeah, so that way I saved a ton of time that way. So this is a great time saving thing. It also looks good. So like if you wanted to do a higher end model, you could always add a little bit more to these wings and make them even better. But for now, that's where it's at, and that's probably where it'll stay forever. Because we're moving on to other Belials and stuff like that. Okay, so now I want to talk about like wrinkly skin. So what wrinkly skin typically is, you've got wrinkles, right? So maybe you have like wrinkly line, wiggly line. Let's get this up closer. Keep forgetting. So what you don't want to do is this. Even though I'm doing like wiggly lines, all these wiggly lines start and stop and are roughly the same color. So that to me is starting to be a pattern. So this is where a lot of people make mistakes on wrinkles. So maybe you're doing like wrinkles around, like on this Goliath, around the leg, and you just start putting these straight lines across, and that's what you do. Well, wrinkles don't really work like that. And what makes them look really very realistic is they need to have some randomness to them. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to have anything start and stop at the same point on either side. So for wrinkles that I do, we go like that, and then we have another one right here, another one right there, little dot right there. You see, if we just keep randomizing this texture,
maybe a little slanty one,
a little something something on the end. That's as good as I can do for a southern accent.
you tried.
So we got something like that. So you got a much more non-pattern looking pattern, and that's what we want. So that being said, this still looks weird. I would call that not wrinkles because it's not following the topology of the skin. So as I learn how to digitally sculpt, I'm learning more and more about topology, and topology is the surface of the thing that you're sculpting on and how that goes in 3D space. So if I just put straight lines across this Harbinger, that's going to look weird because it's not following. I mean, one, he's already got wrinkles sculpted into him, so you could start following some of those. But then also he's got a flow to his body. In the on his legs, it's not just going to be straight lines going across his knee. It's going to actually flow to the shape of his knee. So like maybe it'll curve downwards, or maybe it'll curve and then go straight down, or like in eyes, the little crow's feet on eyes. They don't just go straight out. They kind of wrinkle around and they go in different directions. So that being said, you want to watch the shape of your model, and then you also want to make sure that things aren't just uniform, because that's a big no-no when it comes to that. So let me mix up a couple colors here. The other thing for doing textures, I find that you need multiple colors. So I'm going to use this Deep Forest Skin from Nocturna. I needed a whole bunch of different colors, so I'm not just going to use just Shadows colors right now. German green brown, or black brown. I don't know how I got green from that. From Vallejo. Model color. That. I'm going to do some clear green from Reaper. This is just going to be a hodgepodge of paint brands. So whenever my dropper bottles clog, I don't unclog them, because basically when you unclog them, you push the clog back in here, and then the clog just comes back in and clogs again. So I just use that to keep my paint from never ever drying out, because it's completely clogged, and I just take the top off, dip it on there. That way there's never any paint on the outside either that's wet, and it works out really well. And then I'm just going to grab a little bit of this yellow. It's P3 yellow. It's Cygnus. Alright, so we got that. I'm going to grab this color, because I really like this color. Yambushi Blue. So whenever I'm looking at highlights, I'm looking at very saturated light colors. So this color is very saturated with blues, but it's also fairly light, so it'd be a good highlight. And then for my yellow highlight color, I think I'm going to do this ice yellow. You'll also notice we might not use half of these colors. I'm like a mad scientist, and I just like having the colors on my palette because if I need them, they're there. And if I don't, that's fine too. At least I had them out. All right. Got that. I'm going to switch to a much smaller brush. And we're just going to put in the start of some of those wrinkles. And in this case, I think my wrinkles will actually be kind of my highlight too. So let's do, one thing I like to do a lot is I like to mix up several colors, several shades of the color. Let's move this up. Got, I moved all my lights around, and this one, my light that was on my wet palette is not so much anymore. So, sorry, my wet palette's a little dark, but you know, it is what it is. I swear, these colors are vibrant.
Yeah, we can see the paint. It's fine.
So one thing I want to encourage you is don't be afraid of color. I used to solve all my problems by making everything darker. Now I solve my problems by making everything lighter and brighter. So don't be afraid of color. Try it out. It's fun. Grab a little bit of that. The brightest color because I just want to see what it looks like on the model. Also notice I didn't thin these out. So I want these pretty like as strong as they possibly can. All these colors are fairly thin to begin with. Greens and yellows are not the most opaque colors, as you probably have seen. So if I can keep them fairly thick, it'll show up better. This might still have to do several coats, but so also having some of the texture thicker and thinner is a plus. And this one you can't see super well just yet, but it'll start getting better. Now what's funny is sometimes I get lazy and I start just doing the lines and they're not staggered, but when I get my highlights to those lines, those highlights will be staggered more. So it's okay if they're a little bit ordered at first. Let's put on some a little bit more. Another thing when you're doing these wrinkles, wrinkles are wrinkly, right? Yeah. Take that 45-minute shower and or bath, and you look at your toes afterwards. There's some serious wrinkles going on there, and so there's so the skin goes upwards and downwards. So a little bit, kind of putting little dots and dashes in your highlights of the wrinkles can make them look like they're up and down, and not just this straight line that's going across. Put some more in here. You can see where this would start taking quite a while, especially to really get a bunch of wrinkles in on this. But if you just start motoring through, one of the ways that I kind of get around the boredom factor is I'll be like, okay, tonight I'm just going to do this leg. That's it. And then that way, you know, after 2 hours of putting wrinkles in or something, I'm dead. You know, I need to go watch TV or something, or go to bed, or play video games or whatever. And so, you know, if that was my only goal, it's doable. If I want to do the entire thing, which is also possible, sometimes that can get you in trouble and you get burned out and you quit on the project. So you don't want to do that either. Your nose a little bit better in there. Let's see if I can, there, showing up a little bit more. Now, one thing with wrinkles and stuff is there's also shadows too. So I like doing different colors. So different shades of my green. Maybe when it gets up closer to the leg here, it's going to more of that base coat green, which is just a really vibrant green. Some of this stuff, it doesn't look like it's doing much, but I'm just trusting that over time, over a couple layers and a couple different colors, it will build up enough to where it makes a difference. So just kind of, so I did my more yellowy green there. This is more of a Kelly green type color. This color right here, just mixed with a little bit of green. And then I can also start mixing in some of this really dark green, the green gray. Maybe I'll put some of those maybe not everywhere, but I'll put them every once in a while because sometimes some of these wrinkles are really deep, even up on the top highlight area. So if we just keep adding all this randomness in here. Also notice I haven't completely followed the wrinkles that are already sculpted in the model. I am following them to an extent, but I'm also putting my own wrinkles in. Liz is always like, "Are you putting fake wrinkles in again?" And I'm like, "Yeah."
That's what I say.
That's what
all
she's
the time.
so worried about it.
Yeah, all the time.
No. It's my daughter. It's so realistic. Until I realized one day that that's what she said about everything that I painted, and it was just kind of her default. It wasn't really that it was realistic, but maybe I had just transcended at that point and everything did look realistic.
Exactly.
So another little trick that I do a lot, I'll put paint on my brush and I just wipe it off real quick. So it gives me less paint on my brush, but still enough to paint. You know what? I want to mix up another color. So as I'm getting lower down here, I'm going to add some of this blue into here. Ooh, I kind of like that. I like it. So that's a bluish green. And down here, if you were in my class yesterday, we had this color, tentacle blue, was our shadow. And then serpent skin was our midtone. So since this is more of a bluish shadow, we'll put a little bit of a bluish wrinkle highlight down here. Going like that. So again, I'm not using a whole lot of water in my paint, or in this case none. But if I notice that it's not flowing off of my paintbrush very well, I can add just a touch of water, just a little bit, just enough to get my paint flowing again. So the paint actually gets on the model. Or in my case, I just lick my paintbrush, but I don't recommend that. All right, so little bitty wrinkles down there. Those ones show up really well. These ones don't show up as good, but they're starting to build in. So do a little bit more on this knee. Almost called it a knee pad on his knee.
His knee pad of skin.
Yes, his knee pad of skin. So up here, maybe I will. Over here, I didn't have to worry as much about having unique lines, but on the knee, I think this, it's much more curvy. I can really start to have a little bit more fun with how those wrinkles are built in. He's got sculpted in wrinkles right there, so I can follow those. And then we'll do some up here. Also wrinkles, a lot of times there'll be like little scratches that go across. So maybe we have something like a unique wrinkle or line that goes across that way. So it's not all in the same sort of direction. So this is another way I do save time, is just by not thinning my paint. It builds up much quicker. The color is much stronger, and I don't have to do as many layers to build it up. So that helps a lot. I feel like the more times I put my brush on the model, it's just another opportunity for me to mess things up. So, which is definitely the truth. Those right there. Maybe we'll grab some more of this greenish yellow. Something like that. I want to really see a pop of highlights up in here. So I'm going to go, actually I need to get some of this texture over here. Sometimes, you know, you get going and you're like, this doesn't really look good. You got to finish a whole area before you can really tell if it's good or not, which is kind of scary because what if it's bad at the end of it? But you really need to, before you stop and say that looks horrible, finish off an area and then look at it and go, okay, is this good? Is it bad? Do I need to make adjustments? Whatever. So I'm going to grab a little bit more yellow. I want my final highlight to be really, really yellowy. So we're going to go more yellow and more of that ice yellow. Very little green in there. And we'll do... And these ones will be very dotted in because it's the final or possibly the final highlight. So I want it to look really rough, all that skin. And if you notice, I've got a little stage 5 clinger there. Klingons.
What did you call me?
It's like it's a little dirt clod.
That was a joke.
I was like...
It's something that won't leave you alone.
I would say that, but you live with me, so it's kind of par for the course. Yeah. We'll go this one, this little scratch right here. We'll beef up the highlight right there. But also, maybe I want to make sure that there's a little darker area right there. So we'll go that green that we mixed up before, but maybe we'll do a little bit of that brownish black. Get a nice little deeper crack in the skin there. I actually really like that. So let's see what it looks like in a couple other spots. The good news is, since our paint is thicker, we can cover up. If any of these don't end up looking good at the end or it's too dark, we can always cover it up with some of the lighter colors.
I also put like some red in it and make it look like a cut.
That's ridiculous. But yes, you
That'd
could
be
totally
super
do that.
cool. Gore it up.
Gore it up, baby. Or it could be more pink and it's an old cut that's sort of
like a scar.
like a scar. Army matey. When are the frogs going to do pirates? That's the big question. It does kind of crack me up sometimes when people are asking me questions like, when is Flying Frog going to do this or that? And I'm like, they don't talk to me about that stuff. Like, they're like, where's our models at? Most of my conversations are like, okay, what cool new stuff has Daniel put out? When do I get to paint it?
Yeah. If y'all have any questions, please feel free to ask. Now is the
I may
time.
just be putting people to sleep with all this wonderful
Is that what you're doing?
wrinkle work.
Wrinkle work.
So you see, as I'm just building up those colors, you're starting to see more volumes where there wasn't as much volume before. And that's because I'm gradually putting brighter and brighter, not so much lighter. I mean, if you look at my highlight color right now, it's basically yellow. It's just a little bit lighter than yellow. So, but that yellow does a lot of work for me as far as like making things look like really light and bright and airy. What are you laughing about?
John said, where are all of our models? When is Final Fantasy? I'm sorry, guys. I am not awake right now. When is Flying Frog putting out the new stuff? Good question.
When is China going to get ships that will actually float across the ocean for under 80 grand a piece or whatever?
Yeah.
That is the big question right now.
Yep. Okay, so let me rephrase my statement, because I see what you did there, John. If you have questions regarding Aaron's paint job that he's currently doing.
Why is your painting so bad? I don't know.
He said, in all seriousness, this is very interesting. It makes me see the difference between my level of painting and the level I'd like to achieve.
Some of it is just, it's a lot of practice too. You know, like you gotta start somewhere, right? And if you feel like you're not up to this level of putting these tiny little lines on, or you just, you know, the ADHD won't let you sit there for that long, you still gotta practice, you know. And there's ways of, when I'm really motoring through these types of paint jobs, I can get going pretty quick, even though it's like kind of monotonous and mind numbing. And some of it is just like some of the wrinkles end up looking really cool and you're like, oh, that looks awesome. And it sort of motivates you to keep going. But, oh, yeah.
We do have another question. Oh. What would you do to add texture to a very smooth-skinned creature like a void hound?
You could do literally the same exact thing. You could add these wrinkles because you can't really tell at the end of the day. Like I've put in most of those wrinkles.
If you put them closer together too, it essentially will just create some
really fine texture.
Yeah.
You can do different, like you can do really thick textures or fine textures on something like the Void Hounds. I think that was a long time ago. How did I paint those? If you look at my dry brushing class that the frogs have up on their website, I actually did a Void Hound, but I dry brushed the whole thing and it actually looked really cool. I got to finish my squad up. But what you could do is pick, I think on the originals, I picked areas. Like around the legs, there's a couple wrinkles that come off. So I kind of do like the wrinkles. It's kind of like on this where I just made some wrinkles out in space. Like look at this. There's a wrinkle that's actually sculpted in and I didn't even touch it. It's not painted on. But you can still see it. It still looks cool. So I think with like Void Hounds, that's what, it would be something very similar to these wings because these wings are very smooth. As opposed to the new Harbinger, which I have over here. It's somehow in my mind, I thought I'd have it already halfway painted by now, but I don't. But you see, there's much deeper scratches and wrinkles and stuff. So you have a little bit more to play with, and also your hand's a little bit tight as to where you put those lines. But you can still do basically the same thing. So I'd be more selective with it. Otherwise, you have to cover literally the whole model. And while that could be really cool, oh my gosh, that would take forever. So let's do a couple more right here. And I think you guys will have the point. I'm just trying to paint my gaming piece while we're in this class. So
yeah.
Everything I'm showing you today is stuff that we game with or that we will be gaming with. So I really need to get... I don't know why, but I started my collection. I didn't do the original. Like I did some of the original heroes, but like I did Derelict Ship. I did all the enemies for Derelict Ship, and then I did Blasted Waste. And
but those look super cool.
They do look super cool, and we never played Derelict Ship. Though. That's the problem.
Not yet.
Well, not yet. Yeah, once we get into that.
We now have a monthly game, so.
Yeah.
Brian said, could you use a similar technique to give the impression of scales or other texture?
Yes. In fact, if you look at the Swamp Raptor, none of those scales are really on there. That gives you some scope into the Swamp Raptor is mostly wrinkly, which is awesome, and kind of funny story, background story. And I know I think I told Chris about this. He did a private coaching with me about doing a commission business. And so I was like, well, you always got to weigh the consequences of your actions. You know, if you do a technique, you got to remember, you got to do that technique. If I'm doing this layer level of wrinkles on this leg, I can't stop at just that leg and then the rest of the model is dry brushed or something. I have to do the whole model. So I show my customer and they're like, whoa, that looks great. Well, now I got to do the rest of the model. And I might have spent all my time on this one leg. So on the Swamp Raptor, I thought it would be cool to paint the wrinkles like wrinkles on the rest of the body, and the head, just the head, would have scales. And so there was a couple scales sculpted on it, but then I added all the scales. And I remember sending it off to Scott, and I get this message back, this email back, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing!" Like I could hear the tone of his voice through the email. "This is amazing! Can't wait to see it on the rest of the body." And I just remember going, "Oh no," because it took so long to do the head. So, anyways, but you know what? It was worth it in the end. It came out really, really cool, and that's like the level. Like you can actually put detail on a model that's not there. So if you're doing scales, it would definitely you'd have to put some fake shadows and stuff where the scale is lipped up and everything, but it's basically the exact same deal.
All right, we have another question.
Yep.
Well, first we have a comment and then we have a question. Michael said that he assumed that you were painting the new Harbinger. You're really getting a lot of detail out of that. So good job, Dave.
Thanks.
And then John said, do you let the artwork dictate the basic colors you choose, or do you go your own direction for your gaming pieces?
I look at it this way. I've already painted that version. Like for the magma giant that's sitting up here, or
Belial.
Yeah, like I'll show you Belial here in a second, and that's definitely not the studio paint job. So this one, funny enough, this was supposed to be my Harbinger for just our regular, the City of Ancients set or whatever. Or no, it's Swamps of Death. And I've got spiders done up for Tradera, and like Tradera has the spiders, but they're special Traderan spiders, so I made them red. And so when I was painting this, I'm like, wow, he looks more like those red spiders. What if it's a Harbinger in Tradera? So that's why he's on actually one of these trench bases that I made. And yeah, so anyways, I always like doing something a little bit different. Obviously I'm doing a green Goliath. I'll probably do something similar for my base set Harbinger, just because maybe I could explore a little bit more of that super creepy, like it's like baby skin or something. I don't know, whatever it was, like
Ew, that's
it is super creepy. It's very creepy. Like it's just not right. And that's why I really love the Harbinger. I love that first paint job, but I always look at it like I've already painted it once. I want to do something different. So a lot of times I will do something completely different than the box art that I did, even though technically I kind of remember the way I painted it. But yeah, so I try to do something different. I guess that was a really long-winded explanation of I do something different. All right, so that's kind of like the texturing coming together. Now, you might look at it and maybe you're a little heavy-handed or your paints didn't flow real well or whatever, and you're just like, okay, well this looks cool, but I need it to be a little bit more, a little bit blurry. So it needs to look a little bit more like realistic texture. So that's when I'd come in, maybe I'd grab my middle of the road color right here of green. I'm going to add quite a bit of water to it. So now I'm really thinning out my paint. So it's like very, very see-through. Maybe even a little bit more. A little bit more. And I'll grab just a little bit of paint, and I'm going to do little bitty glazes over this area. So it shouldn't really change the color at all. What we're doing is we're creating little micro filters over that paint. And what it will do is it starts setting your lines that you painted back into the miniature itself. So it doesn't look so painted anymore. It just looks very, very like it's real. Very, very like it's real.
Very, very like it's real.
That's an explanation right there.
Yep.
So I'm gonna so I don't just glaze with one color, I'll also glaze with my lighter color. You gotta be really careful with the lighter colors though, because they'll leave more marks and stuff. So maybe I wanna do my lighter colors right in the middle here where I want it to physically be a little bit brighter. Even though this is a very watery paint, I'm trying to put a very small amount of it on so it dries almost right where it is and instantly. And I just kind of push that paint around, get up on spots. Do this one over here, a little bit right here. And what this does is it just lets it look a little bit less painted, but at the same time, very painted. Can always roll right back into my thicker colors. So that's another thing I really like about wet palettes is I've got my paints here. So if I bring up my palette cam again, so thick paint, 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 super thinned out paint of that color right there. So I've got a glaze of that color, but then I've also got that color at full opacity. So I've always got my colors. I always make sure that I don't just start adding water into my paint right out of the pot, because then when I come back and I'm like, ooh, I need a little bit of punch in one of those highlights. I need to grab this color. Well, this color is already super thinned out because I thinned it out for a glaze. I don't want to do that. I always grab, if I'm going to thin something out, I always grab a little bit of it, put it off to the side, and that's where I thin it out. And then if I test it, I put it on some paper or I put it on the model and it's too thin, I can always grab a little bit more of that thick color and mix it in. So I've always got options. Now sometimes I'll have 2 or 3 mixtures. So I've got this really thinned out version of this green. Maybe I want an even more thinned out version because I want really, really subtle glazes. So I can thin it out even more and then put it on my model. So a lot of times you gotta realize that with each one of these dilutions down here, you get a different version of that color. So it's really nice to have that opportunity, and the wet palette gives that to you. And that's one of the reasons why if I forget my wet palette and I'm down at the game store to go paint or something, I just don't paint. I'd be lazy and I go home. So like right there, I probably put too much paint on, but I can always come in, wipe off my brush a little bit, and just sort of feather out the edges. It's very thinned out paint, so it shouldn't be too bad of a deal, but you could always end up with like watermarks or something. So this will just start getting some better blending right there. I'm going to grab some of this really dark color, and I'm really, really going to thin it out. Maybe I just want a little bit darker down in this little cavity right there. Maybe on the underside of his legs, I want it to be a little bit darker. Now, if you're an airbrusher, you can totally do all this stuff with an airbrush, and it's actually way more effective. So a lot of times I'm doing these glazes with my airbrush, but you don't always need to. Sometimes you just want a little bitty area. You just need to tone down the edge of those little streaks right there. So I just sort of tone it down with the glaze of my dark color. I don't need to get my airbrush out. So again, you got options. You do whatever. I always try to do whatever is fastest. Fastest and looks the best. So that's my rule. Question.
Yes. Brian said, how do you keep from overworking the piece? I have struggled with later steps wiping out the detail I created earlier.
So part of that comes with practice. And you're like, oh man, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I had a model once, I got to a certain point and I looked at it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing I've ever done. I'm going to continue on. And then all of a sudden it stopped looking that way. I went too far. I lost my contrast. I lost everything. And so that's one of those things where practice does help you in knowing when to stop better. So, it's really hard to tell, like, this is exactly where you stop because every model is different. And just simply, I've got this model lit pretty zenithally right now. But what if I had, like, some crazy light source from down below, like he's running through lava fields or something. There's lava flowing up into his skin and everything, like just the light and everything. That's going to change the dynamic of everything. And so it's really hard to tell, like, okay, this is a perfect time to stop. But what I usually do is I get to, like, 2 or 3 steps from being done. So like highlight, like maybe you do your first highlight and you're like, okay, I need to do a second, third, and maybe a fourth highlight. I'll do like the first highlight and I stop. I'll do the first shadow and I stop. And I finish off the model. So I try to paint the model as a whole. I try not, like right now I'm compartmentalizing to this spot. But what I try to do is I really try to work around. Now that's sometimes a little bit scary because you've got the first little streaks on here and you can barely see them. So it's like, oh, this is super lame. You know, I need a little bit of that, the dopamine hit of like, oh, this looks cool. I'm going to continue on. So maybe I'll do like the thigh to almost complete. Like right here is a great place to stop. In fact, I probably could have stopped like a highlight or two before this because I see where it's going and I'm like, I think that will look cool in the end. And then I start working on the rest of the model, and I'm just confident in the fact that like when I get highlights like this, I know that's not the finished look, but that's what I'm looking for, and then I can have that all over this model, you know. So part of knowing when to stop is paint a lot, and you'll start knowing better when to stop, or just stop early, and you can always add stuff later. That's definitely a thing. Maybe down here in the depths of this crack, I'll have a little bit more. We got 2 days from now, and we're still doing this class. I'm almost done with the Harbinger, or the Goliath, whatever he's called.
Yeah.
So like right now, I'm looking at this. I like that scratch right there. This one's a little bit dark for me, but I'm not done with this. I could either add more of those scratches going up, and then it's going to look a lot more natural, or I could simply cover that up just a little bit with more of my green color. So just sort of bring that scratch back into not being too dark, and now it's a little bit more, it's easier to stomach, basically. A couple little ones up here. So even though these are technically highlighting all my wrinkles and stuff, I can still make them so they make that little shape right there more pronounced. So I just put a highlight right at the top of each of those wrinkles. Done. I can do the same thing right here. Cool thing is this is so small, if it doesn't look good, it's very easy to cover back up with my darker color. So we'll go like right here. I see this little bitty dot. So that highlighted that little thing right there. Now that looks better. See how this works? Sometimes you just be patient. So he's got like this vein here and a vein right there. Now I could highlight the whole thing, but that's going to look, I think, weird. So if I just come in and do a couple spots, maybe look like it's very, very bumpy. It's a bumpy vein. Yeah.
Brian said, in some of your earlier videos, you talked about applying extra detail or highlight to a part of the model you want to feature. Do you tend to do that more than doing a consistent level of fine detail across the model?
Yeah, because so it's here's my rule. If you have a highlight everywhere, you have a highlight nowhere. So if we're going for a very final highlight on some of these wrinkles, maybe we're going to go straight ice yellow. If I put that ice yellow on all the wrinkles, I no longer have a final highlight. In fact, I've probably killed my highlights altogether. So the key is doing like, maybe we'll go, now the question is how far back do I put this highlight? Maybe like right here. We'll put these in very small, right along the middle there, and maybe it stops right there. So maybe one more right there, and maybe one on this little freckle that he's got going there. And then I need highlights, final highlights on the knee. So I think right here it needed another wrinkle right there. So I'm just going to put it in right now, and it's going to be my brightest highlight color wrinkle. And then we'll do a couple more. Be a little dot right there. So see, I've got those highlights at the top of the knee, and then it fades down. If those highlights continue on down, then I have them down here, I lose that whole effect of that looking much brighter in a more raised area. So over here, like from this direction, that looks pretty okay. But if you're looking at it, the problem with miniatures is you kind of got to look at them all the way around. So I think that I could add a couple more of those final highlights back further on the leg here. So maybe like right. I figure I can always add more. So maybe we do the minimum, bare minimum, and then we do more later on. Also, I don't see what anything else in this model looks like done at all. So that's going to always throw me off how I'm looking at this part of the model right here. So if I get to a certain level, I've gone too far now. But if I had stopped like 2 or 3 highlights before this and then started on these pieces and those pieces, when I get done, maybe I don't need these highlights at all, because up here is going to be those highlights. And that the fact that I have those highlights down here negates the highlights up here. So you just kind of got to be careful. Now, that being said, if I got to tone down those highlights, guess what? I've got my glazes down here. They're still in glaze consistency. So I can come in. That's my mid-tone color. I just glaze it right over the top of all those highlights. Now, it doesn't do a whole lot because it's super thinned out. But it will tone down those highlights just a little bit. Maybe I just want to tone them down on the edges. So I can just put my glaze on the edge of those highlights, and it makes them more that mid-tone color. You know, it's a major bummer is we leave for San Diego tomorrow.
We leave for San Diego
in a couple hours. Yeah, a few hours. Yeah, no big deal.
Yeah.
I want to finish this now. Like I'm starting to get excited about this model. Like,
you do that.
But I'm not, because we got to go and I got a lot of work to take with me.
Mm-hmm.
Come in. I'm going to start getting lost in wrinkles. But so that's kind of those wrinkles right there. I do need something in this center section right here. So that's one of those things where like I didn't have it in there before. There are some wrinkle lines in there. You just can't see them very well. So maybe I'll just bring that up a little bit more. Maybe over on this side where it bulges out again, because that's a super, super rad thigh muscle. Bring up some of those highlights a little bit more. That's looking pretty good so far. So that's the general gist of that. Now, like on the shin, maybe I grab, and you see I've got lots of colors. Again, if we go back to my palette cam so you can see it a little bit better. I've got bluish green. I've got yellowish green. I've got green. I've got more yellow in my green. I've got even more yellow in my green. And then I've got yellow and ice yellow, so white in that. So I've got a whole bunch of shades of color that I can choose from to put on all different levels of these scale or of these wrinkles. Wrinkle scales. That's what we'll call it. I'm gonna grab right there. Sometimes you got to go a little bit lighter or brighter than you think for it to actually show up. You got to remember, all these colors are a little bit transparent. And so when they go over the last color, a little bit of that last color is actually going to show through. So that's why sometimes I'll grab my brightest yellow, but it's not really my brightest highlight because it doesn't have this yellow behind it. And since it doesn't, it will actually make a little bit darker highlight color. So I can get away with that on some of these lower sections. Okay, that was super fun. I need to move on. Mm-hmm. Any other questions on wrinkly skin? It actually came out pretty cool. I'm surprised. Sometimes when you're streaming live, weird stuff goes down. You're like, it worked last night, but it didn't work today. Okay, so that's wrinkly skin. Now we're going to go to sponge painting. And this is another one of my gaming figures. And I am super disappointed because obviously I did this a long time ago. And so when I first started making my gaming figures for Brimstone, I was like, I'm not going to fill any gaps. I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to do anything special. I just got to get it done. So I started doing it, and then I did one private coaching with a person, and I started painting one of these guys, and there was big old gaps and stuff, and I was like, I got to fill those gaps. So now these guys are one of the squads that I forgot to fill the gaps on, so I need to come back and do that. But that being said, these guys are really cool because they're crab dudes, basically, lobster men, and they can have a really textured, like a different kind of texture. So you start doing those wrinkles again, it doesn't make any sense on this hard, like chitlin armor. So, is it chitlin? Clyton? Kitlin? Chitin armor? I don't know.
There's not an L in the word, babe.
Okay,
Chitlin
well, I like putting L's in lots of things.
Chitlins are something else. And if you're from the South,
Chiclets?
you probably ate them and they're disgusting.
You remember having chiclet?
Chiclets, the
Gum? Yeah. All right. So I'm going to need some different colors on the palette. A little bit. Chitin. There we go.
That's how Michael said that he thinks that's how it's.
It's something like that. A little something. So we're going to do red. I'll do like an orange color, which we're going to need later anyways. What else? Maybe not brown. Maybe not brown this time. Ooh, Ninja Black would be a good one. If it will come out.
It's clogged. Everything is clogged.
I like this purple.
Also, we're at
halfway.
55 minutes. Yeah.
Wow, we're cooking. Okay, so for this, you guessed it, the sponge effect is done with a sponge. So like any blister pack sponge, would not recommend like a kitchen sponge because they're too big of pores. But you'll find that like sometimes your army cases, the pluck foam that's in them, is actually a perfect consistency for this. So it's like a little bit thicker. Little bubbles in the foam. So what we're going to do with this, this is one where like over here with the with all the other techniques I've showed you, I try to keep my paint fairly thick. For this, we actually want our paint to be a little bit thinned out. So I'm just going to grab, I don't know why I'm using the world's smallest brush for this.
I don't either.
I'm going to grab a little bit of water from my palette and just mix it in. Now I'm only going to, maybe I'll use that red for something else. So maybe I'll make another little tray over here of thinned out red. I don't want to break my own rules. I just told you guys not to thin out the whole pot.
Yeah.
Okay, some orange. And we got our purple. I'm going to put that up here. Make a thinned out version of that. Maybe we'll do a thinned out version of this black brown. Whoa, that's a lot of water. Oops. All right, so we got some thinned out versions of our colors. I'm gonna grab this sponge, and basically what we're gonna do here is start lightly putting the sponge down, putting paint on our model via the sponge. And so the sponge will give us a cool little texture. The reason why I thin this out more, now if you don't care about how it looks in the end, it will still look pretty good with not thinned out paint. But it's a little bit more abrupt, and so it's harder to control. So I kind of like taking, so I've got that, I'm gonna dab it off. Maybe I'll dab it on a paper towel first. Basically, we're gonna get this kind of texture. So I'm gonna start with this dark brown black. I'm not gonna put too much of this on here. I just want a little bit of it, because even in highlight areas, you can have like a dark color, especially in textures. It makes it just look a lot better. Maybe I'll do a lot more of this down by these hands, because I want down here where his little claws are, I want them to get really, really dark. I think it's creepy when monsters' hands and feet turn to black. It's just like, oh, it's just evil looking. And I like that. I'm not going to do this whole model because that will take forever. As much as I'd like to just burn through this squad real quick. You guys don't want to sit here for that long. So we've got that color. While it's still wet, let's move to another color. So let's do red. We have a question?
Oh, no, sorry, I was stretching.
Okay. So this one is not going to show up as well over the red, but it still is an important part. So we're creating a bunch of colors that kind of work together to fool the eye into thinking that this is a texture. And I can actually use that red. I can come back to it several times during the process and kind of tone things down a little. I just spit on the model.
Well, it's yours, so it's okay.
I was just thinning the paint a little bit further. Let's try a little bit of this orange. Now the cool thing is, if you don't clean the sponge in between, or you don't want to clean, there's no way to clean the sponge really. But if you don't let the colors dry in between each other, they actually tend to wet blend a little bit on the model. So I'm being really light with my application here. Let's even bring it up, some of those up, these little reindeer things. I don't know what those are called. These wigs. I don't know the technical terms for anything.
Those are probably just bones. I don't know. They look like
They're like
bones.
smokestacks.
Oh, they're smokestacks?
Yeah. Maybe this guy's mechanical. I could put him in Tradera. Like, paint him to look like there's metal showing through. That would be kind of cool. Sometimes it's just nice to think outside the box. Oh, show.
That's where you live.
Yeah.
Breathing tubes. Thank you.
Is that what those are? I didn't know lobsters breathed. Breathed. So now I'm using a little bit more opaque or not thinned out orange. So see how that's showing up a little bit better? But I'm still putting it on very, very lightly, and I'm only putting it in my highlight areas, or the areas that I want to be a highlight, because orange is the brightest of all my colors that I'm using. So even though it's just another texture color, I'm using it to highlight the miniature. So once I've got that on there, I think that looks pretty cool. Now I'm going to go in and enhance those areas. So I'm going to grab some of this orange, and we will either finish off some of the patterns that are naturally being created by sponging in here, or I create my own. So maybe around the eyes, I'm going to add a little bit more of this orange. To create like a pseudo highlight right there. I'm going to put a little bit of this up here.
You're kind of doing stippling, right?
Yeah, I'm just kind of dotting it in. Not really full-on brush strokes. Being really light with my brush. You can always add more. So even if it looks a little bit weird right now, we can always add a little bit more to this. Put a little bit right there. We'll do a little bit. I'll even grab some of that more thinned out orange. See what that looks like. So I'm putting it in the area that already had orange, but I'm not covering up the entire area. So I'm actually adding more dots of orange within the orange dots that I stippled on. If I want them more opaque, I grab more opaque paint, because like my teeny tiny dots aren't going to show up if it's just that thinned out paint. It might show up when I first put it on, but then it disappears very quickly. So use that opacity as my ally. Right up like that. This. Let's do a few down here. Kind of just adding some little highlights and points of interest. So Something like that. I think I need some middle of the road colors, and I don't have any here. So I'm going to do orange and red mixed together. So I can get a reddish orange. So that red really wasn't showing up at all because it was very similar to whatever color I had airbrushed on here. So I'm going to grab this color that's not our brightest orange, but a little bit more red, and I'm going to start adding some points of interest back here. Little dots. Sometimes I push the brush down and it doesn't even hit, and I just figure, well, hey, it's not going to leave a dot there. That was fate telling me this is going to be super random. Put some of these on the leading edges of some of these pieces back here. I think I can't remember how I made the studio version of this. I think each plate went to almost black, which could be, again, adds to the evil feel. So maybe we mix up a darker version of red, so it's just black in the red. And then we can kind of sort of start stippling this in back here to the back sides of these plates. We'll do it on these plates too, just to see what it looks like for now. A little bit darker. I kind of like that. Liz, do you concur?
I do.
What movie was that from?
What?
I'll give you $50.
Okay, first of all, you know I suck at naming names and movies.
It's the movie where the dude, whenever he was trying to convince somebody that he knew what he was talking about, he would just turn to the other person and go, "Do you concur?"
I'll look it up.
It was Catch Me If You Can. Okay. Best movie ever made.
Sweetheart, I watched that one time with you.
Well.
Oh, Brian. Brian had it. You owe Brian.
I owe you a beer, Brian. Next time we see each other. And happen to be in a bar, which may never happen, but you know how it goes. It could happen. Okay, so I'm just adding some darker textures in areas to give me a little bit more contrast. Put these down here. I can also do this with the sponge as well. Use this color maybe to line the back sides of these scales right here. So it gives me a little bit more definition. A little bit more definition here. Same rule applies as to the wrinkly skin. What was that rule? Oh, we can always glaze it to glaze things back in. Make them look less painted and more just natural. Start getting those. Get this one right here. If I wanted to put, this goes back to adding details that aren't actually in the model. Maybe, so this crack is right here, but there's no crack right there. So what if I want to just continue that on? I just want to make it, and it cracks up like this, and maybe it breaks off, it goes down, it goes into this piece, and then this crack continues on this way, and it just abruptly stops right there. So we've got that right there, and then I can take some of my colors, my more highlighty colors, add a little highlight to the edge of this crack. This one right here. Again, I'm kind of dotting it in because I want it to look jaggedy. I don't want it to be a perfectly smooth break in the arm, in the carapace. Like this. So some of this, I'm using this color as both just straight up highlighting areas, and I'm also using it as my texture. So you can sometimes get away with both. Not always, but sometimes. that. I really, really want this final orange to be just the orange. Like so orange. Because that will be like a really good focal point for areas. So I'm just going over my highlight areas over and over and over again with my brightest orange color. Again, if I go too bright, I can always tone it down a little bit. Technically, these guys, they do have a seam right here in the middle. So maybe I can get away with not filling that gap, but I still feel like I need to. That gap I definitely need. Like I changed the angle of the arm, so that's why that looks weird like that. Leave it to me to do a conversion, but then refuse to do gap filling. Doesn't make any sense at all, I know, but I'm going to therapy about it. Do a few more over here. So again, I'm using my my texture as a way to highlight areas as well. So where I put it in kind of haphazardly before, now it's actually got purpose. Kind of move those down. Really, really bright highlights right here for the eye. Because I think, and again, I can't remember how I painted this the first time, but I think he's just got black eyes. Like, it's super creepy. Black eyes,
Do it.
black hands and feet
Yes.
on a monster. Scary as anything. And then all the other colors, super vibrant. It just adds to a very disconcerting look that I like. Something like that. Sometimes as I'm doing the texturing, I'll block out some of the other stuff that I know will be like a dark color, like these little fangs and stuff. Make them completely black. Come back and highlight them later. Question?
Yes. Michael asked, do you do work with conversions, sculpting, or green stuff?
Yeah. And I'm also learning how to 3D sculpt.
But he mostly so he doesn't really use green stuff though. He uses Abe's epoxy sculpt.
Yes, it is amazing. Amazing stuff.
I can get a link.
It's a little bit, it is the cheapest putty out there. Especially if you buy it in 4-pound blocks. Which is a little bit expensive right off the bat, but you never have to buy it again. And it doesn't really go bad, and it's awesome. So, that. Let me add a couple some little things up here. Sometimes I just pick out little bitty details and that's it. I don't do any more. I can always add more later. But right here, I'm literally just picking out the upper edge. And then there's a little ridge that goes around the nose here. I guess that's a nose. I don't know. If those are breathing tubes, I guess he doesn't have a nose, but it looks like he has one. No, we always try to put human traits on animals and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what I'm doing here. We have a different shade of this red for down here.
Just call it a snoot.
Snoot. Schnoozer.
Mm-hmm.
Schnauzer doodle. A little bit brighter back here. So again, it really does pay to sort of paint the model as a whole. Like start painting the entire thing, putting texture on the entire thing, because not having anything on these arms kind of throws me off as to how the rest of the model's looking. I mean, it looks pretty decent right now, but it could look, you know, I might get scared and stop or change things, and I didn't need to. So get some more of this really dark color back here. One thing about models is they really need to be in focus. So the more in focus, meaning the more definition you have between the different parts, the better. So obviously you don't want to have thick black lines, you know, with every plate of armor or something, but you do need something that sort of defines it from the other armor. That was a lot. Go like that. In here, maybe these could be a little bit darker. Sometimes I go a little bit too dark, but I can always go back and tone it back down with some of my lighter colors. So I'm not, just gotta not be afraid. That's pretty much it. And you do over time start developing a better and better an eye for how something's supposed to look. You might not know at first, but you'll never know if you never practice, you never try it. Funny thing is, these are actually the old slashers too. I should have put together my new slashers, but again, it's trying to find the time on certain things is a pain in the butt. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we got that. I think I'm gonna put a little bit, and if I don't want a color to show up very well, I will thin it a little bit before I start putting it on. So like I did that black brown, I just want this to be darker down here, so I'm gonna put a little texture in of a darker color. But I don't want it to be so dark. So I can always put more layers on. If I just kind of dot in some of this darker brown down here, I can let that dry, see if I like it or not. Continue making it darker, or stop. Let's continue doing the back of this part right here, because I think this will look cool. Really, really dark in the back of the carapace here. Now again, if your paint's the darker colors, you can definitely get away with thinner paints. The lighter colors, you need them to be thicker so they build up and you can actually see them. The dark colors will be dark no matter what. But see how that's starting to darken the back of the head and starting to frame the head really well. So maybe I'll do a few of my dots up into this little crack right here. So it kind of gives that, looks like almost a shadow or something, even though it's really not. And I can put more layers of the exact same color on and it will continue adding to my texture. Question?
Nope.
Stretching.
Right. Stretching again.
It just starts giving you a better and better. So maybe I want, where'd our yellow go? Our yellow's turned to green. Let's grab a little bit more of this yellow. Super, super vibrant yellow. And we'll put it in some of our final spots here, just in a couple spots. See how bright that looks? It's a way of life. It's always important to take a step back, from a couple feet away and look at your model again to see if you've got things in the right spots. Sometimes when you get up real close to a model, you can actually lose perspective, and what looks like a lot of contrast is actually no contrast at all. So sometimes when I'm doing stuff like this, I've actually gotten pretty good at putting fine details in from far away, which is amazing because I'm blind as a bat. But I've learned to, my touch of the brush is just right. So I do a couple test strokes to make sure it's actually touching on the model, and then I just barely touch it. You can start seeing how things are looking. Do a little bit right here. That looks kind of cool. Do this eye, the lid of the eye right there. Now, if this model simply was even like a really soft sculpt and there wasn't even eyelids there, but if I painted that line right there, it would look like there was an eyelid there. So that's where you can start getting away with actually putting detail in that's not on the model. And you'll see that, even some of these models, like, these boutique companies that are doing like 75 millimeter models and they're just fantastic, unbelievable sculptures. The painters will put a whole bunch of detail on them that's not there just to make them look cooler. So I think part of painting, the fun of painting is just adding stuff that's not on the model. Actually, I think I can work with that mold line right there. So I think I only have to fill those gaps. The mold line on this, I will actually make it look like it's part of the armor. So clever way of getting rid of that. We'll do a couple of these yellow spots over here. If this ends up being too yellow in the end, I can always glaze some orange back over it, and then it'll just be a really, really vibrant orange. So it all works out in the end. I got an idea of a really, really vibrant streak going right up one of these flagpoles here, whatever it is, breathing tubes, the breathing apparatus. So when I put the paint on, I'm trying to let a little dollop of paint pop off. It's not thinned, and that's the best I have, because otherwise this yellow is very, very see-through. So I'm just trying to get tiny little mountains of yellow paint to come off my brush. That looks cool. And I think if I have that on each one, kind of like this bright streak that goes all the way up, it'll look really, really cool. And I can always push my shadows down again on the top of this. Sometimes my first brush stroke when doing these textures, because I know I need very little paint to come off on when I get closer up here, I'll do the first one up here where it doesn't matter. I know that's going to be all black up there. And then I just put a couple more tiny ones lower. It looks awesome. Push those shadows down. Very cool. Obviously, like there would be texture back in here. You gotta, even if you can't physically see what's happening, you gotta trust that something is happening. You're putting little bits of paint down, and it's creating more and more texture in there. And just even if it's the same color, you're putting it back and it's not putting it in the same spots. So it just sort of creates more and more levels of texture. You can have a couple little patterns in your texture too. I just told you not to have patterns, but you could actually make little patterns where like there's streaks coming through it in different, in a darker color or something. You have all the lighter colors around that. Question.
Yes. Do you have advice on when or if to use a gloss varnish versus painting on reflectivity and sheen?
So typically for 28 millimeter miniatures, putting gloss varnish on them makes them look cheap. So most people don't do it. it just, for whatever reason, it looks really bad. I think it reflects so much that it's not a good idea. But as your scale gets a little bit bigger, like on these guys, probably still the same thing. I wouldn't really put gloss varnish on these guys. But a semi-gloss will make your blacks darker. It'll make your colors more vibrant. So a lot of times I will put like a semi-gloss on, and a lot of times I'll do it with the airbrush. So I can put just a little bit. So it's almost like a semi-gloss. And that can look really, really good. So I don't typically put gloss on anything. It's always just like a semi-gloss. And a lot of times when I'm putting final shadows and stuff in on a model, I'll do that with my airbrush and inks. And inks are already semi-gloss. That's their, the color they are. And so putting a little bit of that is like putting a semi-gloss on there. So you see where those lighter colors are really starting to pop. Still looks weird that all this isn't painted, but if we just cover that up, oh, look at his head. All right, so that's doing sort of an armor like that. Now, there's nothing stopping you from getting your sponge out again. I would definitely thin down the paint even more, though, and then sponging over this, because that could end up looking really cool, too. Just get a really, really super random effect. Anyways, any other questions on doing sort of dotted, stippled texture? Yes, no, maybe so?
Not currently.
All right, so this one will go kind of quick because there's already a ton of scratches on here. This is my Guardian from the Targa Plateau. He's walking around. There's lots of lights on and everything. But these guys have lots of scratches in their armor. So basically, this is how I work a scratch. So I want a really dark brown. So I've got this brown black, but it's not dark enough for me. So we're going to add some black to it. Actually, I take that back. Maybe it was perfect. I don't know what I'm doing. We're going to put a little scratch right in here. So one thing with scratches, you need the underlining highlight. And I didn't do that on this model because I was going really fast. But I'll show you how to do it. And then that means I'm going to have to come back and do it on everything. So, doing vertical scratches is a bad idea because which side do you under highlight it? I don't know. So on a scratch in a piece of metal, let's say this is a scratch right here. You can see the light is hitting my finger right here and creating a little bitty highlight ever so slightly. And then we've got our scratch that's dinted in. Think of it the same way. A lot of people think they got to put the highlight on this side, but this is actually the wrong side. This is the side that the light is actually shining on. The highlight up here is way up here on top. So that being said, when I'm putting in these scratches, usually use brown, and also do it on stuff that's a little bit lighter so it actually shows up. If I did this on a black Guardian, it would look okay if I took a really good photo and really could see it, but otherwise you can't see it in real life. It doesn't matter. It's a whole bunch of work that you didn't need to do. So when I'm doing scratches, again, kind of like what we were doing with our lines here where it's tapered on both sides, a scratch, I oftentimes will make sure that it starts off and then I do this wiggle thing. So basically the paint or the metal is failing in a strange, like in a not ordinary way. It's not like a straight line. Let me get in here closer. All right, so you see that? So most people do their scratches like this, which is fine, but I do mine more like this, and I'll have areas that are not perfect because I want it to look like things have broken away, that it's, Also, I will make usually where I always have a story to my scratch. So let's say the guy was sweeping this way with his sword or a bullet was coming in this direction. This part of the scratch will be physically bigger because that's the moment of impact right there. And then it gets thinner as it goes back. But you also have this little bit of jiggliness. I always say, usually at the end of the day, I don't do freehand, but I consider scratches freehand because you have to make these tiny lines and then underline them. But I usually do it at the end of the day, so my hands are a little bit jittery, I'm tired, and I automatically, just on accident, make those lines. So, pulling this guy back up. Let's see if we can get that focused in. I'm gonna go, maybe he has something hit him right here. So we'll start this. Started right there. So we'll go a little bit bigger than normal. Pull this. Now you got to remember, when this goes down, scratches typically don't follow it down and then start over here. They skip. So this is a higher thing. You got to think if this is a blade, it hits there and then it hits down here. It doesn't hit right at that corner. So that's another thing that a lot of people do wrong, is they put the scratch down that side and over, but actually it would skip a little bit, hit over here, and then maybe it just tapers off to nothing right there. So that's a cool looking scratch, I think. Another thing, and the reason why I put some more of that brown black in here, because now I can add some black to it, make it even darker, and we're going to add depth to our scratch. So up here, I'm going to put where it started, because this is the initial spot. This is the most kinetic energy right here. It's going to go the deepest into the skin. So I'm going to make that more black, or maybe completely black. And it may not be a huge difference, but it's a little bit of a difference, and it does make a difference at the end of the day. Then maybe I'll put a little bit of that right here where it starts up again. And that's where I stop. The rest of the scratch is the normal color. So you almost can't, in this video, you may not be able to see the difference, but it is there, and it does make a difference. Now, I need white. What did I do with my white? I packed it.
You packed it, yeah.
Oh, I got white right here.
Okay, good. I was going to say, that is in the suitcase. That is not
It's
coming
over.
back out right now.
It's over.
Well, while you're exploding
Dumping
paint,
white paint all over the place.
yeah.
All right.
How did you add the icicles?
Funny you should ask. I 3D sculpted them, printed them in clear, and then added them with water effects. And I've got a video on Miniature Monthly showing the whole process.
It's actually super cool.
But yeah, that's how I did it. I used to do it by I would cut out so like when you have, I have white paint all over me.
Yes.
When you have
You got a napkin?
blister packs, they have that little plastic around the outside of them. I used to cut that up into the shape of tentacles and then or icicles, and then I was like, hey, I could probably print clear with my 3D printer. So I just sculpted some icicles, printed them out, and that worked out really, really well. And it actually, they look more like icicles because they're round and not flat. That was a lot of fun. A little bit tedious because I put on a lot of icicles. And then started playing with them and started breaking them off. So I realized that was probably not the best thing to put them everywhere. But I don't know. They do look cool, though.
Oh.
And I figured these guardians are like sleeping. They're sleeping giants in a snow world, so they're going to have stuff all over them. He powers up. He starts getting warm. I probably could have put some snow up here, but I really liked how the armor came out, so I just said, nah. It was okay. Okay, so I've got my white. And what I need to do is put the thinnest white highlight at the bottom of this. I'm going to grab some paint using my tiny brush, but I'm also flattening the brush out like I did when we started this video, so it's as thin as it can be. And again, I want this to look jaggedy, so I'm going to put some on, and then I skip spots. It's kind of like dotting it in. You can go a little bit further. So if you find that you screw up, so I'm going to screw up. Let's say you do way too thick of a line right there. And quite honestly, some of you, that will be how thick your line is to begin with. But you're always going to want to strive to get the thinnest lines you can possibly get. Just bring in your brown scratch again, or brown color, and push that line over so it's thinner now. So that's a great way to fix your lines if you mess up. So, that being said, I did one, which means now we're going to have to do all of them. No. But I'll do another one over here. So this one. Like that. The other thing is, you don't have to underline every single scratch. So the underline just says that there's some depth there to the scratch, and so it's actually light reflecting off the edge of the scratch. But you don't need to put a highlight on every single one, because if you put them on all of them, we've all seen that picture, you know, go on Facebook or something and somebody has like scratches everywhere and every single one of them is highlighted, and it might be done perfectly, but it's too much. So you just want to do just enough to look cool. In this case, I'm doing the back side of the scratch because we're looking forward at this, so I'm taking an artistic liberty there. So just little things like that. Put another one up here, maybe a couple more on the top side here. Put one over here. Do this bottom side right here. It curves down. You just start getting those little bitty, it definitely does, it definitely gives you more detail for sure. And it looks pretty cool. So, like I said, do yourself a favor, don't do every single scratch, but do a bunch of them. And you can, sometimes there's a scratch that's just a white streak. Really thin line somewhere, those are okay. And sometimes it's just a really thin, darker brown streak. And that's okay too. You don't have to have the highlight and shadow on everything. It doesn't have to be a full-on huge gash scratch. It can just be like the minimal. Sometimes I do that scratch and then I put a couple little white dots past it. And the reason I'm using white paint, everyone always says don't ever use white paint, but white paint shows up. And when you're making a line that small, you really need that bump of color. So, got that. Go over here. Just like that. Just little bitty highlights. So that's basically how you do scratches. And sometimes less is more, just a couple. Like these guys been sitting out in the, I almost said the sun. He's been sitting out in the elements and the snow for a long time. And, you know, technically he's been battling for a millennia. So the fact that he's all scratched up kind of makes sense. Still want to make my one that, you know how you can come up against the damaged Guardian. I wanted to do a damaged one, like do a whole bunch of sculpting and have the arms so they all come off. So as he gets damaged, you pull the arms off and you can physically see that he's not working as well anymore. But I haven't done that yet. So I've got the model sitting in the garage. Good times. All right, so that's scratches. Any questions on that? It's pretty straightforward, but it's harder to do than it looks, I guess.
Not that I see.
All right. Cool. All right. So how much time we got left?
12 minutes.
12 minutes. Can we paint fire effects in 12 minutes? I do not know. All right. So I'll give you the lowdown, the rundown. So this is my Belial. This is my version of Belial. He's the depths of hell, Belial. He's got fire coming out of him. He's got crackling through his armor and the fire showing through, or magma, or whatever you want to call it. This guy's all about cinder. So one of the ways to make your fire effects or lava effects look really good, like if you look at the picture right there of the magma giant, the fire effects are very, very vibrant. And so I worked for a long time trying to figure out how to get that. Some people use fluorescent colors, things like that. But I always think that fluorescent colors they have a fluorescent look to them, which is not natural. They might photograph great, but they don't look that great in real life. Of course, that's my own opinion, but that's the way I feel. So that being said, I started looking at, magazines that had pictures of fire in it, and they look like fire, and all that stuff's made with CMYK, so cyan, yellow, magenta, and black. And so I thought, well, I've got to be able to make fiery looking techniques with just my regular paints. So what I found was use really, really vibrant colors. So in this case, I've got this Cygnus yellow. So this would be the reason I don't use the Shadows of Brimstone yellow. This is a great yellow, cinder yellow, but it's like almost a little greenish. That's not fire. This is fire. So that would be the reason why I would use, it's the main reason why I use different brands, because I find the exact color I need and that's what I use. I don't care about the brand of paint. So I've got this fire, I've got yellow, I've got a really vibrant orangey yellow. So this, or red.
Orange yellow.
That is not orangey yellow. So this is clear red, but it's a very vibrant. Okay, I'm losing it. Very vibrant red. So this is on fire red. And then I've also got this orange from Monument Hobbies, and it's a very orangey orange. So you can see on my palette here, you can even with this darkness here, the yellow is very bright, the orange is very bright, and the red is very vibrant. Compared to all the other colors, they show up probably the best. And then next up is this blue. It's very vibrant too, but it doesn't look like fire, so we're not going to use it. Okay, so I've got. So one of the things that I do, like if I'm doing hell bats for, or these are what are magma bats from Cinder, Caverns of Cinder. I can't remember the actual name of them. I think they're magma bats. Anyways, they just said in the book, use hell bats. So I'm like, okay, cool, but I'm going to paint them to look more like magma, kind of like the lava men and stuff. So I want to do something like this. So this is my initial sketch doing wet blending. If you took my wet blending course yesterday, you would know how I wet blended this all together. And you can even see, I didn't even wet blend it very well. There's some streaks and stuff, but I don't care. This is going to be like a fiery effect. So one of the things that makes fire really look like fire is you got to be very vibrant. And the magic color is not yellow and it's not red, and that's what I always thought, that it was all about how much yellow and how much red you have on the model. It's all about how much orange is on the model, and there's a lot of orange in this pocket right here, but it looks really, really good. So, and even if you look at the magma giant there's a lot of orange in that and just a little pockets of yellow that give you that really hot heat. So if I got this right here, if I'm sort of leveling up these tentacles right here, I'm going to take some of my yellow, put it back here because I figure the fire is deep down inside of him. So I'm going to try to basically insist on this color. And if you've taken any of my other classes online or in person, I always talk about insisting on color. And insisting on color is just painting the same color over and over again until it becomes super, super opaque. So I know this area is just yellow, so I'm just going to paint yellow right over it. I'm not worried about blending or anything. Even pull this out a little bit more there. Right there. Maybe I'll do a little bit in his mouth too. Something like that. Go all the way back in his throat. Now, one thing about you'll find with saturated color is it shows up almost in the dark. So having this yellow really, really vibrant, even in low light situations of a gaming store or your garage or whatever, those colors will still show up really brightly. And that's because they're so saturated. So see that super yellow in there? It's not really saying fire to me though. So we need to make some orangey colors. And there's like the perfect happy middle of the road orange that you got to find. But that's where practice comes in, and you just kind of start mixing up orangey yellows and putting it on the model and seeing what it looks like. That. Put this right here. It was really bad with my application of color the first time. I didn't even do the sides of the tongue here. So I'm just going to get some of this red paint on there. Down here. Also, when something's lit up, there's not typically shadows in it. So having like deep dark colors doesn't make really sense for fire or magma. There's areas where it can be deep and dark, but not where it's the hottest. That's like super bright. So this will actually be a lot of orange, a little bit of red, a whole bunch of orange. Kind of wet blending these colors together. Let me put them on this side. Started these at GenCon last year. I should bring them back with me and just finish them up this year. Although that might be a little bit boring. Maybe I'll paint something else. Whatever it is, it's going to be for us, Liz. Mm-hmm. I always paint my own models at GenCon because I used to try to paint the studio models at GenCon, but I spend a lot more time on the studio models and it takes longer to get them going. And that's super boring for people. You know, they come by every day and you're still at the same spot on the wings. So last year I had my Belial almost done at GenCon, and people really liked that. Okay, so we get a little bit more of that orange. I'm going to need more of that orange, so we'll just start insisting on it. That's how you blend right there. You just put the paint on and then rub it off with your finger. Come in a little bit closer. So fire is typically one of those effects that you're not going to speed your way through because you do have to take time and get these colors really, really vibrant to pull the effect off really well. But I think it's worth it. Just keep doing this. Do this on this side. It's not orange enough. Always remember there's little sparks and stuff in fire, so you can do a little bit of stippling here and there. So right now I'm just kind of stippling in some more of this orange over my red and yellow spots. Just trying to build up that orangey color so it's more and more opaque. So see how that's starting to look a lot more vibrant? Kind of like the areas up here. So up here, maybe I want to start blending between these colors so I can kind of pick a color that's in between the two, and I just draw little bitty lines here. There's so much texture up on the skin that little bitty lines will actually make it appear like it's blended, but it's kind of a fake blend. So I'm just kind of bringing that orangey back here. See if we can't make the back of this look like it wasn't just abruptly ended. No. Okay, so that looks a little bit smoother. Let's go really, really yellow up here. You can tell how long these have been sitting around because they're actually almost a little dusty. Oh, Aaron. Okay, so one of the things I'm doing that can be very interesting with these, see how there's all these little wrinkles sculpted into this? I'm running that yellow right down those wrinkles, a couple of those wrinkles, not all of them, but some of them. And what that will do is that starts looking like that. It's like creases of the lava cutting through the skin. So again, we won't do it everywhere, but we'll do it somewhere. Some of the wares. And then you can always take some of these colors again, putting a little dollop of paint, teeny tiny. Looks like little bitty sparks deep down in the red. So that looks not super exciting right now, but as we get more and more into this, you have more and more of these sparks, it starts making more and more sense. I'm just going to try to say more and more as many times as I can.
More and more. Okay, that's 10.
All right, give me 2 more minutes. We're gonna paint until everybody leaves. No, I'm just kidding.
No.
We actually need to go to San Diego.
Yeah.
All right. So see how that's getting brighter and brighter? Now I can always take some of my ice yellow down here, mix that in with my white, my yellow, or just put white into the yellow. But I always want to have a little bit of yellow in there. You can't just go straight to white. And then I can make some really hot spots. And again, less is more. So if you put too many of these, they kind of nullify themselves. So we'll just put a couple in here. A couple little spots where it just is hotter than anywhere else. Maybe there's a hot spot down here. It's already looking pretty cool, and I haven't done a whole lot to it. I can still work this area for quite a while and make it really, really cool, but we ain't got no time for that. Put a couple hot spots into here. Back in here with the lips, maybe where the lips meet the skin, I'll have some of that lava peeking through. That looks pretty cool. We'll do a couple of these, some little sparks coming down these tentacle tongues.
Did you say tentacle tongues?
Tentacle tongues.
Okay.
Tongues of steel. Okay. All right. That being said, you guys need to enter the painting contest. You've got all the skills now that you need to get you over the hump.
Use it.
Most important thing is keep on practicing. Keep on just working it because practice does make better. It may not make perfect, but it does make better, and you ain't going to get any better without practicing. So let me just show you. There's the contest. We got 3 categories: single brimstone hero, single brimstone creature, roll to move, open category. And those are the categories. Super simple. Enter your models. Do all that cool stuff. If you are looking for some more painting instruction, what do you know? I do that over on, we don't need that. Over on miniaturemonthly.com. We have pre-recorded classes, online classes. The synonym one, very good. It's a month long. Lots of cool info. I do full color PDF workups of each class. There are lots of extra videos besides just the video that we filmed live. And so definitely really, really cool. We've got some stuff coming up in San Diego. If you're out in San Diego, those are live classes at an actual store. We've got a weathering class coming up pretty soon. That's a 1 weekend class, but it will also be super awesome. And then I also have private coaching. So if you want to just sit down and talk with me for an hour about your project or something that you're doing, I am more than willing to do that. So those are our things. That's our spiel. That's how we eat every month. And yeah.
We also have a coupon code for 10% off of any of the online classes on our website.
Only for you guys.
Only for you
and
guys.
Gals.
Exactly. The coupon code is R, the number 2, M, 10.
10.
R2M10.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys for coming out. I hope you guys are enjoying Roll to Move. The guys from Flying Frog always do a lot of extra work for these types of things. And they're also just working 24/7. I can literally text those guys at 3 in the morning and somebody's there working on production. So
They are hard workers.
they are very hard workers. I, on the other hand, maybe I'm just going to bed from video games. So it's a little bit different. But anyways, thank you guys for coming out and spending time with us. Really enjoyed it. Happy to share a little bit of knowledge with you. I hope it helped. And I'm super excited that this is going to be up on YouTube for people to come back and look at later. So if you have a friend who wants to know some of these techniques, just shoot them out of this video when it's up. All right? Okay, until next time.
Bye.
So long. Fade to black, baby.
Bye.
All right, have a good one. Go paint something, all right?